glad that you guys are enjoying me and Skitten's reactions to overly sarcastic production vids, because they're really fun to do. This one's about Beowulf. You guys said that you really enjoyed the my fascination of Yggdrasil, the life tree, and yeah, I really haven't named a horse after it in a video game. Me, and then I figured out, yes, it is me and every other nerd on the foreseeable planet, and I'm glad to be amongst your ranks. So what's left here, which I'm trying to pull up the video now, sorry, give me 1 second, is a video about Beowulf. I know a couple things. I just know Beowulf is just an old, finally got the vid pulled up. So what I know, all I really know about Beowulf is that it's like a Viking storytelling thing. There was a bad movie made about it. First time I saw Angelina Jolie's ass. Grindelwald from the Harry Potter thing is in this, is a big giant, right? The Grendel guy. And it's like a war story or whatever. So yeah, let's get into it, man. Play.
Beowulf was written a little over 1,000 years ago, and it's one of the oldest English texts that still exist. And that's English with big glowing air quotes, by the way, as it was written in Old English. Now,
right, which means it's illegible, and they have the grammar of me.
Might have Old English confused for that stuff Shakespeare wrote. You know, all those forsooths and verilies and whatnot. But that's actually early modern English. Now, failing that, you might think that messy language Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales in must be Old English. You know, that stuff you can kind of read, but it's all written with weird spellings and pronounced like you've got a golf ball in each cheek. Well, I'm afraid that's only Middle English. No, if you want to know what real Old English was like, look no further than...
Canterbury Tales is not Old English?
Oh, good lord, where do you start? One thing to note about Beowulf is that once you boil it down to its essential textual components, it's actually a remarkably short story, especially by epic poetry standards. This is because the style of writing at the time involved what amounted to drive-by exposition, where the narrator would, at random intervals, veer the story off course into a random tangent and explain huge, complex historical contexts to provide backstory for everything from a line of great kings to a small pile of gold. So when you cut out all that nonsense, you're left with a nice, simple story about how one man beat the crap out of 3 giant monsters, became the king of a small country, and inspired all the coolest parts of both J.R.R. Tolkien and Skyrim.
Okay, but those asides, right, set the context for what storytelling I feel like was, what the purpose of storytelling was at the time, was, you know, for like historical textbooks and, yeah, you know, interesting what have yous about what have you. So, so yeah, but let's continue.
This is good for me because, in case you haven't noticed, I love to talk. And in between the simplicity of the story and the shortness of the text, there is plenty of time for me to ramble on about the idiosyncrasies of Beowulf without exceeding my arbitrary time limit. For instance, did you know Beowulf literally means bee-wolf, which itself was a colloquialism translating to bee hunter, which in turn just meant bear? Well, you do now. So our story begins with some backstory. Yeah, I know what I said, but this part is actually pretty cool, so roll with it. Once upon a time in ancient Denmark, there was a great king named Shield-Shaven. He doesn't appear in this book, but Shield had a mighty son, Beowulf, who became an equally mighty king when Shield died. However, despite the name, this was a different Beowulf, who also does not appear in this book. Beowulf, still not that one, in turn had a son, Halfdana, who sparked a long-standing feud between his family and the Heathbards by getting himself killed by Froda, an ancient Danish king and lord of the Heathbards who also might have been his brother. And none of this appears in the book either. Isn't this fun? But Halfdana managed to have 4 kids before he died, although one of their names has been lost. The 3 kids we know about were Hrothgar, Halga, and Hrothgar. No relation. Now, among these kids, Hrothgar actually does appear in our story. Basically, he won some big war and got himself crowned king as a result, and decided to use his newfound wealth and power to build himself the ultimate party venue, a huge mead hall he named Herat.
You see that in the movie, right?
He and his thanes spent their days partying up a storm, and it is here that our story truly begins. But hey now, I hear you cry. I thought this story was supposed to be about Beowulf. I mean, it's his name on the cover. Apart from that fake-out guy with the same name 2 generations back, we haven't heard a thing about this Beowulf guy. What gives? Well, geez, you're pretty impatient, aren't you? I get your hopes up by telling you this story's gonna be short, and this is how you behave? Shame on you. Besides, I wasn't finished. See, this story happened a long time ago, in that magical, poorly defined time period in which it was widely accepted that ghoulies, ghosties, and long-leggedy beasties of all ages were just sort of roaming. And in Hrothgar's neck of the woods, the nastiest of these monsters was an ugly piece of work named Grendel. Grendel, we learn, is a big ugly giant descended from the original bad guy, the biblical Cain, and he lives in a grody swamp near a lake full of monsters, called, aptly enough, the Lake of Monsters. But the construction of this new mead hall starts disturbing his natural habitat, largely because the sounds of the 24-hour party circuit happening 10 feet from his house cause him to become just a touch crankier than usual. Now, Grendel has a Grinch complex the size of East Texas, and when he hears the near-constant partying coming from Heorot, he gets a doozy of an idea of the terrible, awful variety. Right? After all, the easiest way to stop the party is to kill everyone partying.
Eat 'em.
Well, you gotta give him points for efficiency. So that night, Grendel scoots on over to the mead hall, busts down the door, kills 30 of the Thanes, and skedaddles back on home. This violent party crashing becomes something of a nightly trend, which is disturbing for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being the fact that a rampaging hellbeast murdering a bunch of their friends didn't kill the party atmosphere the first time it happened. But we must not forget that these fine fellows were Nords, one of the most famously testosterone-poisoned cultures in all of human history, so it should come as no surprise that it takes several more late-night murder trips from Grendel before Hrothgar considers calling on their buddies, the Yates, for a little bit of help. Either he got tired of losing his Thanes, or he got tired of replacing that stupid door every day. Either way, it's time to call in the cavalry. Enter the Storm Yates, led by Beowulf!
Hey!
So Beowulf, right? This guy...
So Beowulf is not a part of the main group, which is okay. That's easy to follow. We're here.
Is just the coolest. Hrothgar has known him since he was a kid, and since then, Beowulf has made something of a name for himself doing some monster slaying. So Hrothgar asks what Beowulf's plan for dealing with Grendel is, and Beowulf is all like, well, you know, I've been thinking. Grendel's not really a warrior, because he doesn't use weapons, right? Well, I think it's only fair if when we fight, I don't use any weapons either! And everyone's like, that's a great idea! But an impending fistfight with a terrifying murderous giant is no reason not to party. Actually, in Nordic cultures, it was specifically a reason to party. So they get down with their bad selves in the harem for a while, but one of the warriors is doubtful of Beowulf's abilities. So this guy, Unferth, is like, hey, Beowulf, I heard you lost a week-long swimming contest to your buddy Brekka. Now how am I supposed to expect a loser like you to beat Grendel? And Beowulf is like, I'm afraid it's true. After swimming for a solid week in full plate armor, I'm afraid I can't say that I beat Brekka. But in my defense, I was slightly slowed down by the 9 sea monsters I killed along the way! So night falls and Beowulf prepares himself for the upcoming battle by dumping all of his armor and weapons and waiting in the Heorot for Grendel to come a-stomping by. And soon enough, Grendel busts down the door and encounters Beowulf. So they beat the ever-loving crap out of each other for a while and tear up the Heorot like crazy, and Beowulf wins by ripping off Grendel's arm with his bare hands. Ha! Yep. He's been disarmed! So Grendel flips out and runs back to the lake to bleed out in peace. Beowulf gives Grendel's arm to Hrothgar to hang from the Heorot's rafters, and having completed the Kill Grendel quest, King Hrothgar showers Beowulf with rewards, gives him access to his halls and gear, and probably also lets him buy a house in Whiterun. Unferth, that guy from earlier, apologizes for doubting Beowulf's abilities and gives him an heirloom sword named Hrunting as an apology present. They all start fixing up the Heorot, then use their newly repaired mead hall to get blackout drunk. Life is good. Until Grendel's mother storms into the hall, murders Hrothgar's trusted advisor, grabs Grendel's arm, and vanishes into the night. So Hrothgar sends Beowulf to track down Grendel's mother and avenge the murdered Thane, Ashera for those of you who care, and Beowulf starts hunting her down. They track her through a variety of cartoonishly evil locations and end up at the Lake of Monsters, where they find Ashera's head along with a veritable menagerie of sea monsters. Beowulf prepares for battle by putting on his heavy armor and cannonballing into the lake to confront Grendel's mother, who lives at the bottom. For those of you concerned with his well-being, don't worry too much. Beowulf's lungs are the size of train cars, and the solid day it takes for him to hit lake bottom does little more than bore him. But his boredom is soon over, since as soon as he gets close to the bottom, Grendel's mother ambushes him and drags him into her cave, which is actually a pretty nice locale. Anyway, they do glorious battle, but Beowulf's sword Hrunting utterly fails to hurt her in any way, so he resorts to his tried and true method of using sick nasty wrestling maneuvers. Unfortunately, Grendel's mother finds this effort utterly unimpressive and just starts trying to stab him a whole bunch. But luckily for Beowulf, Grendel's mother has a bit of a hoarding problem, and her cave is absolutely full of nifty magical weaponry. So he grabs a shiny looking sword that turns out to be super magical and manages to kill her with it. Then, after some searching, he finds Grendel's corpse and decapitates it to bring his head back as a present for Hrothgar. Funny story about that. As it turns out, both Grendel and Grendel's mother were totally immune to mortal weapons, but that sword Beowulf grabbed had been forged by giants and was thus capable of hurting them. Why Grendel's mother kept the one thing capable of killing her within arm's reach is probably the subject of much scholarly debate. Unfortunately, this kick-ass magical sword appears to have been one use only, since after Beowulf uses it to decapitate Grendel, the blade straight up dissolves. So Beowulf swims back to the surface with Grendel's head and the sword's hilt, both of which he gives to Hrothgar. He's showered with gifts again, partying happens, etc., etc. Then Beowulf and the Yeats, having done all the monster slaying they felt obligated to do, sail back to their homeland, where Beowulf presents their king Higelac with a bunch of treasure and is lauded as a great hero. As thanks, King Higelac gives him a fancy sword, a bunch of land, and a really nice house. My god, this is Skyrim. But before we go any farther, let's talk about that one-use-only sword, because it's actually really interesting. So first of all, the hilt is carved with vaguely biblical scenes about how the giants were wiped out by the Great Flood in an effort by God to wipe out all evil. The hilt is also covered in Norse runes, implied to be some kind of magic, which is interesting because traditionally pagan magic and Christianity didn't exactly get along. And the other cool thing about this sword is that it was described as Damascene, damascened. That is, having been put through the process to create Damascus
Damascened.
steel. Now, for those of you who don't know,
so
Damascus
it's
steel
fancy
is a
as
legendarily
fuck.
tough metal whose forging process has been lost, which has endlessly frustrated modern metallurgists since there are a ton of Damascus steel blades lying around, and you'd think we'd be able to reverse engineer something. But no, every time we try, we just keep finding weirder and weirder things about Damascus steel that makes us want to know how to make it even more. For instance, not only do the blades look super cool and magic, kind of like
They do
liquid
look fucking cool.
metal, they've actually been shown to contain carbon nanotubes. Carbon goddamn nanotubes. How does that even happen? But anyway, back to Beowulf. So King Hygelac and his next of kin go the way of all badasses, and Beowulf finds himself crowned king of the Yates, who he manages to rule without incident for a solid 50 years. That is, until some rando manages to piss off a dragon by stealing a cup from its hoard.
What?
And hey, guess what? Beowulf has another
What?
monster to fight. For background, the dragon had been chilling for the past god knows how long in a barrel full of gold. The barrel was a burial mound for a troop of warriors from some ancient and noble race, and it had been filled to bursting with fancy treasure. The dragon lived there undisturbed until some tricksy hobbit snuck in and stole his favorite teacup or something. The dragon objects to this rather strenuously and decides to hunt down the thief the old-fashioned way, by burning everything in sight on the principle that he's gotta hit the criminal eventually. And hey, if this is reminding you of anything...
Oh yeah!
Yeah, that isn't a coincidence. Tolkien was a fan of the classics, but the dragon pisses off the wrong Yeet when he torches Beowulf's house, so Beowulf does his thing and decides to challenge the dragon to single combat. So Beowulf and his 12 backup dancers go track down the dragon, bringing with them both the thief and the stolen shiny thing. Now, you might think that using weapons to kill a 100-foot fire-breathing hellspawn could be considered poor sportsmanship, but Beowulf acknowledges that trying to barehanded wrestle a goddamn dragon might not end well for him. So he brings that fancy sword Hygelac gave him. It's called Nailing, it's an heirloom, and it's shiny as hell. But that doesn't matter for very long since it snaps in half 3 seconds into the fight.
What?
God, they go through swords like coffee filters around here. So the majority of Beowulf's posse bails and skedaddles into the woods, all except for one, a bloke named Welof, one of Beowulf's kinsmen, who couldn't stand idly by and watch Beowulf be mildly inconvenienced by a tidal wave of hellfire. So Welof rushes to Beowulf's aid just in time for the dragon to get in a lucky hit and bite Beowulf clean through the neck. Now, you might think this would be a problem for Beowulf. Only if you haven't been paying any attention, of course. Nah, Beowulf uses this opportunity to go for his dagger, while Welof manages to find a soft spot in the dragon's armor and gets in a hit. Whereupon Beowulf finishes the job with his trusty knife. So now the battle is over, you'd think Beowulf would start succumbing to that gaping neck wound of his, right? Nah, he's too cool to succumb to a little thing like massive blood loss. On the other hand, deadly dragon poison could certainly pose a problem. So Beowulf's actually dying, and he's like, Welof, come closer. I have one last request. Could you go drag the treasure out of the barrel so I can take one last look at the riches I just won?
Sure.
Yeah. So Welof zips into the barrel, comes back out with an armload of the shiniest of the treasure, and Beowulf is like, thanks, kid, have fun being the next king, and dies. So Welof, now King Welof, exiles the 11 dudes who ran away from the dragon, and the Yeats retrieve the rest of the dragon's treasure and hold Beowulf's funeral. Then they set up a kick-ass barrow for Beowulf, reburying the dragon's treasure in with him, where, according to the text, it remains to this day. Don't get your hopes up, though. Some dragon probably already called dibs.
So old writers are like anime writers. Yeah, they really are. My teacher showed your video in class. He warned us that you said crap, triple dot. He rips off Grendel's arm with his Beowulf hands. That's a good one. Instead of bare hands, it's Beowulf hands. Because Beowulf means bear. Good storytelling with Over Sarcastic Productions, man. I'm so glad that they continue to do their thing. Make sure you support them and all that. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for coming through again. I'll holla, man. Peace.